Hey everyone, and welcome! Are you ready to take a deep dive into the world of large language models? I mean, LLMs are everywhere these days, and it feels like every day there's something new and mind-blowing happening in this field.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And what's really exciting to me is that it feels like we're not just seeing like small improvements. It feels
Mm.
like LLMs are like a fundamental shift in how we think about
The-
artificial intelligence.
I totally agree. And it's not just hype, right? We've got some fascinating articles and research papers lined up for this deep dive, so we're
hmm
going to break it all down.
Looking forward to it.
But before we get too deep, let's just take a step back for a sec. Can you give us like a quick LLM 101? Like, what are they really?
Okay, so at their core, LLMs are these really complex neural networks, right?
Hmm.
And they're built on this architecture called a transformer. And basically what they do is they process language on a massive scale.
Okay, when you say massive scale, what do you mean? Like, how much data are we talking?
So think of it like this. Some of these models are trained on data sets that are petabytes in size. That's like, I don't know, a gazillion books or something.
Yeah, one of the sources we have here actually said it's like the entire Library of Congress, like multiple times over.
It's insane, right? And that's what's so cool about the transformer architecture. It's like it can actually make sense of that much information.
Okay, so hold on. Earlier you mentioned this transformer architecture thing.
Right.
Can you explain that a bit more? Like, what makes it so special?
Okay, so imagine like a super efficient search engine, right? But instead of just like matching keywords, a transformer network is looking for these complex patterns and connections between words, like in a sentence or even across paragraphs.
So it's like it's understanding the context, not just the individual words.
Exactly. Like, think about reading a book. You don't just understand the words on the page, right? You understand the characters, the plot, the whole story, and that's what LLMs are getting better at.
Yeah, and that's what blows my mind about this whole thing. It's not just memorizing stuff. It's like it's starting to get at the meaning.
It's getting there.
Okay, so we've got these massive models trained on tons of data. They're using this fancy transformer architecture. But how does it actually work? Like, how does an LLM actually do something with all that information?
So there's this three-step process that's pretty fundamental. Tokenization, encoding, and decoding. Tokenization is like you take a sentence and you break it down into its smallest parts.
So, like, individual words?
Yeah, or even smaller, like parts of words, or even individual characters, like those magnetic word tiles you see on fridges.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, I get it.
Then encoding comes in. This is where each of those little pieces, those tokens, gets converted into numbers, a code that the computer can work with.
So it's like the LLM is learning a secret language code.
You got it. And then finally, we have decoding. This is where the LLM actually uses all those patterns it's learned to generate an output, whether that's writing a sentence or answering a question or even like translating languages.
That's incredible. You know, one of the articles we've got here actually talks about how LLMs are getting super good at translation, like reaching levels of accuracy we've never seen before.
It's pretty amazing, right? Like to think that a machine can grasp like the nuances of different languages, the idioms, the cultural context, it's really remarkable.
It is, and that's what I find so fascinating about this whole field. It's like we're getting closer and closer to that line between, human intelligence and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the lines are definitely blurring.
So, okay, we've got a pretty good grasp now of what LLMs are and how they work. But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. Like, how are these things actually being used in our lives today? What are some real-world applications that our listeners are probably bumping into every day?
Yeah, I bet most people don't even realize how often they're interacting with LMs.
Probably not.
Like, have you ever chatted with a customer service bot online or used a voice assistant on your phone?
Oh, all the time.
Chances are you were talking to an LLM. And that's why those interactions are getting so much smoother and more natural. They're getting better at understanding how we actually talk.
That's a great example, and I've definitely noticed that those bots are getting a lot less robotic sounding. But this goes way beyond just customer service, right? We're talking about potentially changing how we learn, how we access information, maybe even how we create art and music.
Exactly. The applications are pretty much endless, and they touch every aspect of our lives.
Okay, so for example, one of the sources we have for this deep dive talks about how LLMs could revolutionize education, like by creating personalized learning experiences for every student.
Yeah, like imagine having a tutor who can explain things in a way that makes sense to you, or who can adjust the pace of learning to match your needs.
That's amazing. It's like having a personal teacher available 24/7.
Exactly. And that's just one example.
And then there's the whole world of online search, right? Like, Imagine being able to search the internet using natural language, like you're having a conversation with, I don't know, like a super smart librarian.
Yeah, that's the dream, right? Instead of typing in a bunch of awkward keywords, you could just ask a question in plain English and get a clear, relevant answer.
That would be incredible. It would make finding information so much easier and more intuitive. Okay, so we've seen how LLMs are already shaking things up in areas like customer service, education, and information access. But let's be real, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much more to uncover, especially when we start thinking about the potential downsides and ethical challenges that come with this kind of powerful technology.
Yeah, there are definitely some big questions we need to be asking.
And those are exactly the questions we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Okay, so we're back, and I gotta say, that first part really got me thinking. LLMs are already doing some pretty amazing things, but as with any new tech, there are always, potential downsides, things we need to be careful about.
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to remember that LLMs, for all their smarts, they're not perfect.
Yeah, and that's what I really want to dig into now. Like earlier, you were talking about how LLMs are learning and evolving all the time, but they can still make mistakes, right?
Yeah, for sure. One of the big things to keep in mind is that sometimes LLMs can actually generate information that's just plain wrong.
Mm.
They might present something as a fact when it's not, or even contradict themselves.
It's like they're hallucinating, right?
Yeah,
Making stuff up that sounds plausible but isn't actually true.
that's a great way to put it. And it's a good reminder that we can't just take everything an LLM says at face value. We still need to use our own judgment, you know, check sources, think critically about the information.
Yeah, totally. It's not about replacing human thinking. It's more like using LLMs as a tool to help us understand things better.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot, where we're leveraging the power of LLMs, but also being aware of their limitations.
Okay, so accuracy is one thing to watch out for. We also touched on the whole issue of computational power, like the sheer amount of resources it takes to train and run these massive models. Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Sure. So training an LLM requires like enormous amounts of data and processing power. I mean, we're talking massive server farms, huge energy consumption. It's a very resource intensive process.
Yeah, and that raises some, sustainability questions. Like we're all trying to be more eco-conscious these days, and it sounds like LLMs could have a pretty big environmental footprint.
That's a valid concern, and it's something researchers are actively working on, trying to find ways to make the training process more efficient, reduce the energy consumption.
Well, I really hope they figure that out because it would be a shame if this incredible technology came at too high a cost to the planet.
For sure. It's all about finding that balance, pushing the boundaries of innovation
Hmm.
while also being responsible.
Okay, so we've got accuracy, we've got the environmental impact. Any other red flags we should be aware of?
Well, there's also the whole question of access and control, right? Like who
Yeah.
gets to develop and use these powerful models? How do we make sure they're being used for good and not for, harmful purposes?
Those are some really big questions and honestly, kind of scary ones too. It sounds like we need to be thinking about the ethical implications of this technology right from the get-go.
Absolutely. It's
Mhm.
not enough to just focus on the tech itself. We need to be having serious conversations about responsible development, ethical guidelines, all that stuff.
Totally agree. Okay, so lots to chew on there, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about the future. What are you most excited about when it comes to the future of LLMs? Like, where do you see this all going?
Well, one area that I'm super stoked about is the development of what we call multimodal LLMs.
Yeah, we touched on that briefly earlier, but can you remind us what that means?
Sure. Right now, most LLMs are mainly focused on text, right? But imagine a model that can understand and generate not just language, but also images, sounds, even video.
Whoa, hold on. So instead of just reading a book, an LLM could like watch a movie and actually understand what's going on.
Exactly. It would be
Okay.
like giving LLMs a whole new set of senses, a way to perceive and interact with the world that's much closer to how we experience it.
That's mind-blowing. And what kind of impact could that have on things like, say, robotics or virtual reality?
Oh man, the possibilities are endless. Imagine robots that can truly understand and respond to their environment. Virtual worlds that feel incredibly real and immersive. We could even see totally new forms of art and entertainment that we can't even conceive of right now.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a whole new era of like human-computer interaction.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how it changes how we think, how we create, how we relate to the world around us.
So here's the big question, the one that everyone's wondering about. Are we going to see LLMs that can actually rival human intelligence and creativity? Like, are we on the path to creating machines that are smarter than us?
That's a tough one. And honestly, it's a question that philosophers and scientists have been wrestling with for centuries.
Hmm.
Like, what does it even mean to be intelligent or creative? And can a machine ever truly replicate those qualities?
Yeah, it's not just about processing speed or memory capacity, right? There's something more to it, something that's hard to define.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? I think LLMs are actually helping us understand our own cognitive processes better. By studying how these models learn and process information, we're gaining insights into how our own brains might be working.
So it's like LLMs are a mirror, reflecting back at us our own ideas about intelligence and creativity.
I like that. And they're challenging us to rethink those ideas, to expand our understanding of what's possible. Like maybe intelligence and creativity aren't just human traits, but something that can emerge in different ways in different systems.
That's a really cool way to think about it. It's not about machines versus humans. It's more like exploring different points on a spectrum of intelligence and creativity.
Exactly. And, even if we set aside those big philosophical questions, there are still some very real practical concerns that we need to address.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, we can't just ignore the potential risks, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about how to prevent LLMs from being used for harmful purposes, like spreading misinformation, creating deepfakes, manipulating people.
And how do we make sure that this technology benefits everyone, not just a select few? How do we avoid making existing inequalities even worse?
These are such important questions, and they highlight the need for responsible development. We need to be thinking about the ethical implications, the societal impact of this technology from the very beginning.
So, what can our listeners do? How can they be part of shaping this future?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed. This field is moving so fast, so keep learning, stay curious, ask questions.
And don't be afraid to challenge assumptions, to think critically about the information you encounter, whether it comes from a human or a machine.
Exactly. And talk about it.
Hmm.
Have conversations with your friends, your family, your community about the ethical side of LLMs, the potential risks and benefits. The more people who are aware and engaged, the better chance we have of steering this technology in the right direction.
This is so much bigger than just lines of code and algorithms, right? We're talking about the future of our society, how we choose to integrate these incredibly powerful tools into our lives.
Well said. The future of LLMs is not set in stone. It's a future that we're all creating together through the choices we make, the conversations we have.
Okay, folks, so that wraps up part 2 of our LLM deep dive.
It's been a great discussion so far.
And we'll be back in a flash for the final part, so don't go anywhere. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive on large language models. I don't know about you, but I am like seriously mind blown by all this stuff. It's like we're living in a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? It's incredible how fast this technology is evolving.
But now I'm kind of ready to get into the really big questions, the ones that keep me up at night. Like, okay, LLMs are doing all this amazing stuff, but can they really understand language the way humans do? Or are they just like really good mimics, able to copy patterns without actually grasping the meaning?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that people have been debating for centuries, long before LLMs came along. Like, what does it even mean to understand something?
Yeah, it's not like we can just like peek inside an LLM's brain and see if it's getting it right. And think about how different understanding can be for different people.
Exactly. Like, what makes sense to me might not make sense to you, even though we're both human.
Right. So how can we even begin to measure understanding in a machine? It's such a slippery concept.
It really is. And I think that's one of the things that makes LLM so fascinating. They're forcing us to confront these fundamental questions about our own cognitive processes. Like, by studying how these models learn and process language, we might actually gain insights into how our own brains work.
Okay, so understanding is tricky. But what about creativity? We see LLMs writing poems, composing music, creating art. Is that real creativity, or is it just a really clever imitation?
Another great question. And I think it really comes down to how you define creativity.
Right, because there's no like one agreed upon definition.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you believe that true creativity requires consciousness or self-awareness, that sense of I that humans have, then maybe LLMs aren't there yet. As far as we know, they don't experience the world the way we do.
But they're still producing these works that we find, beautiful, surprising, even moving. I mean, one of the articles we read for this deep dive talked about an LLM that wrote a piece of music that actually made some people cry.
Yeah, I read that one too. Pretty amazing, huh?
It is. So if that's not some form of creativity, then what is it?
I think it challenges our assumptions about where creativity comes from. Like maybe it's not just a human thing, maybe it's a more fundamental process that can emerge in different ways, even in systems that don't think or feel the way we do.
Okay, so maybe it's not about machines versus humans, but more about this spectrum of intelligence and creativity, with both humans and machines occupying different points along that line.
I like that. It's not about rivalry, it's about expanding our understanding of what's possible.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
But even if we put aside those big philosophical questions for a minute, there are still some very real world concerns, right?
Oh, absolutely.
hmm
As with any powerful technology, there's always the risk of misuse.
Like, we need to be thinking about how to prevent LLMs from being used to spread misinformation or create deepfakes or even just manipulate people on a large scale, right?
Yeah, those are all very real dangers. And we also need to think about equity. How do we ensure that this technology benefits everyone, not just a select few? How do we prevent it from making existing inequalities even worse?
These are such crucial questions, and they highlight the need for, like, responsible development. It can't just be about the tech itself, it has to be about the values, the ethics that guide how it's created and used.
Exactly. We need to be having those conversations right now before it's too late.
So, what can our listeners do? How can they be part of shaping this future?
I think the first step is just staying informed. This field is moving so fast, so read up on it, stay curious, ask questions.
And don't just take things at face value, right? Think critically
Yeah.
about the information you come across, whether it's from a human or an LLM.
Exactly. And most importantly, talk about it. Have conversations with your friends, family, your communities about the ethical implications of this technology, the potential risks and benefits. The more people who are aware and engaged, the better chance we have of steering this whole thing in a direction that benefits everyone.
This is such a crucial moment, right? We're not just talking about lines of code, we're talking about shaping the future of our society.
Well said. The future of LLMs is not predetermined. It's something we're all creating together through the choices we make, the conversations we have.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of large language models. It's been an incredible journey, and I hope you've learned as much as I have.
It's been a pleasure exploring these topics with you.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those minds curious. The future is out there, waiting to be written, and we can all be part of shaping it. Until next time, keep on diving deep.